Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the October garden checklist video. I do one of these each month. Last year you might find the October garden checklist video is a little longer and a little more of what anyone in America could be doing in their garden in the month of October. This year I've been more specific to what I'm doing in my garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. This place is pretty full. But despite that, I'm going to find some planting holes as all of these annual things that you see, all of this color that's around me starts to fade here by mid to late October. I'm going to come in here and put a few more woody plants in here, a few more evergreen things to make sure that winter, that it still looks great during the winter months. And so, again, as these things start to fade out, October's the best planting month of the year here, especially in the Southeast United States. We have shorter days, cooler nights. The plants just don't need as much from us. It can be a little dry. It's definitely one of the drier months of the year, so I do have to be conscious of watering things that I'm putting in the ground. But the overall stress on the plant and the gardener who's actually planting them is much easier in October. Just make sure you're concentrating on things that are definitely hardy in your area. I wouldn't attempt to push the boundaries of plants. Like, I'm not going to plant unhardy palms in my area in fall. Those things I would attempt in the spring. That way they would have a season under them before they went into their first winter. So keep that in mind. If it's hardy, October may be the best month to plant. With that said, look around your garden going into October and say, is there any color out there? You know, what can I do next year to make sure that there's color here in the Southeast? Camellia Cesanquas and things like beauty berries, which I have over here on the left, have color on them. As we move forward later in October, I'll be planting pansies and snapdragons in the ground for winter color. We can do ornamental cabbage and kale, that kind of thing. And bulbs, we can all be thinking about our late winter, early spring flowering bulbs right now and getting those ordered if you haven't. A lot of mine are actually being cold treated because things like tulips, for me, we don't typically get enough cold treatment. So they're coming in already cold treated for me. As an added bonus, this little area right through the middle is a dedicated annual bed. And meaning that when these annuals come out, this will be replanted again with snapdragons, tulip bulbs, and pansies. It's a little early here in early October, despite the fact that the pansies are, I'm sure, sitting on the tables everywhere. I usually will wait until right about the 15th to 20th of October. I have a soil thermometer, and when that soil thermometer goes down to 65, that's when I put in my cool season plants. When these annuals come out, I'm going to put down a little bit of compost to refresh this bed, and then those things will go in. So I frequently talk about going to garden centers at different times of the year so you can see some of the things that you might be able to have extending your season of color. This Mexican sage is a great example of that. It's just been a really nice foliage plant all season long, and now here we are going into fall and it's putting on its show. The flowers are starting to open, so the bees are on it. I've got asters that are just coming into bloom in the landscape. And also, if we come around to this side of the fence, there are flowering shrubs like this Caryopteris that are just starting to bloom with those dark purple flowers. This is the first year it's in the ground, so this is not going to be its most impressive year. This is a great plant for the pollinators and a very, very late summer into fall blooming shrub. Another great example of that in the Southeast. If I can get around over here before the camera makes it here. Here is a Camellia Cesanqua that is in bloom. Actually, some of the blooms are almost past, but I've got lots more buds in the process of opening up. So here we are as I'm telling you all these other annuals and perennials are winding down and I'm thinking about replacing them. There are also other things that are just coming into bloom. So, again, shopping at different times of the year is important. For many of us in the South, we have warm season grasses. My zoysia grass is an example of that. It actually goes dormant in the wintertime, so the green color fades out of it and it's just kind of a brown during the wintertime. I don't mind that at all. Bermuda and centipede and other grasses do the same thing. Some people do like to overseed it with annual rye, and October would be the month to do that. and that will give you a green lawn through the winter. And then when it gets hot in the late spring or summer, it dies, and as the zoysia wakes back up. Again, I don't really care. I don't mind that. I don't mind that winter color. I don't mind my garden looking like winter. A lot of people want, the same look 12 months out of the year. I actually like the seasons, and so I don't mind that at all. Those of you who have cool season grasses, like bluegrass or fescue, it is time for any renovations that you would be doing. So overseeding, or starting over, and seeding new turf, or sodding cool season grasses. You can fertilize during October with a winterizer or something like that, and then of course aerating, those kinds of things. So you have projects in your cool season grasses. For me, I'm just going to let mine go dormant and take a break through the wintertime. With all this color in the garden, like these dahlias, it's kind of hard to believe that in the next 3 or 4 weeks we could potentially have a frost in the garden and knock all this stuff back. But that's the way it is. It's October. I have already put in my cool season vegetable garden. This is the time of year. If you're further south than me, you may still be getting some production out of your summer vegetable garden, but you're certainly not far from from replacing it at this point. And here in the South, we can grow cool season vegetables well into November with a little bit of protection, some sort of frost protection blanket over top of them. I may be able to extend it as far as December. That's going to be lettuces, any leafy thing like kale, then of course broccoli and kohlrabi. Many different cool season vegetables can be grown here. And you can see they're already off and running. I think this time last year, I was just pulling out my tomatoes. This year, it was about 2 weeks earlier. They had burned out a little bit more this year. The other thing, if you still have some of your summer crops out there, you can save the seed on some of them if you're interested in doing that. This okra that's behind me, that's actually 12 feet tall or so, there's big giant okra on them. This seed was given to me by Buddy Lee, and I want to save the seed, and so I'm going to let that okra dry on them. So that's the purpose of leaving those big okra trees that I have at this point. So any seed saving you're doing, and that's across the board. If you were going to save seed on annuals, if you were going to save seed on your perennials, anything from your vegetable garden, annual or perennial, this would be the time to be gathering those things up. So unless you're right along the Gulf Coast, it's probably too late to be thinking about these fall vegetables from seed. By the time the seed came up and they were in a transplantable size, you would have lost a good portion of the growing season. So at this point, if you're interested in growing any of these leafy greens, it's probably best to go and buy the plants. Your garden centers and box stores both will have these plants available. Lettuce is super easy, really. Leafy greens are a great way. If you've never done any vegetable gardening at all, you can plant these in containers or plant them in the ground, and generally speaking, reap some reward from them that may get you started vegetable gardening. A couple other quick vegetable garden tips. One is if you're pulling out your summer crops and they were diseased in some way, I would not put that stuff on the compost. Send it off the property in some other way. So you don't want to just keep recycling that stuff through your garden every year. You'll notice I have some protections here built into my fall vegetables. Number one, I have this deer fence. It was purchased as a deer fence. It's just a black plastic mesh. It's held up for years. I've had this thing for a long time at this point. It's 7 foot tall, but I've got it just doubled over, so it's only 3.5 feet tall, and it's connected to pieces that I have for my tomatoes to grow on. This is to keep rabbits out of the garden. The other thing is it gives support. This whole structure gives support, and these hoops down at the end give support so that I can put some sort of cover over this for frost protection. The other thing that your fall vegetables need protection from are cabbage moths. Cabbage moths will come around. The little white, beautiful butterfly flying around your garden right now will lay its eggs on brassicas, things in the brassica family, which includes cauliflower and broccoli and kale, and do significant damage. So I can also put a cover over here just to protect from those cabbage moths landing. And that's just going to be a really light frost protection blanket, so the sun can still get through it, So your plants get plenty of light, but it keeps those cabbage moths off. As the days get shorter and the nights get cooler, your herbs are going to start to go to sleep, whether they're perennial herbs like the oregano here and the sorrel, or annuals like basil. If you want to go ahead and harvest some of those things if you want to, you can store them however. You can dry them, or you can freeze them, or you can just use them right away. But keep in mind, once it gets cold, some of them get kind of bitter, and or they just disappear into the ground altogether. So you might want to go through and just harvest some so you'll have some through the fall and winter to use. So let's quickly go through just some general questions that I would be getting in the fall here on my channel. This would be things like transplanting, fertilizing, watering, dividing, those kinds of things. Because again, October being a transition month, some of these things you can do, some of them you probably don't want to do or delay doing. Okay, so let's jump right in. If I wanted to transplant a shrub as it gets cooler and the days get shorter in the fall, great time of year to do it. I actually think it's probably a better time of year to do it a little bit later, but you could go in here, I could go around the base of this loropetalum and I could actually go ahead and cut the roots around the base of it where I'm going to be digging it out, and I can actually leave it in place for a month or two and then transplant it later, just kind of prepping it for moving it. At the same time, I would go ahead and reduce the size of it a little bit. But here's what I know. If I prune this loropetalum blooms in the spring, I'm going to be taking the flowers off. So know that. Any pruning you're doing here in October, if you don't know what plant, when that plant blooms, keep in mind you could be taking flowers off for next year. And that's things like azaleas that are behind me right now. This is an okay time to do pruning, once things are kind of dormant late in October. But keep in mind, if you don't know what that plant is, you could be removing flowers from it next year. Like Dr. Armitage says, if you don't know, just prune it after it flowers, and then you don't even have to think about it. But again, transplanting season is upon us, and the other things that can be transplanted are perennial things. Here's a Veronica down here. Of course, I'm going to pick the smallest thing in the garden, but here's a perennial that's going to go dormant. As it's several points here about it going dormant. One is we want to let it go completely dormant, okay, before we start cutting it back, because this thing's going to pull everything that's in this green. It's going to pull down in its roots to store for next year. So let it go completely dormant before we think about cleaning it up or taking it out. If I wanted to save seed on it, we would let these seed heads completely mature. Okay, that's another point. And the third point being, once it starts to go dormant or is almost dormant, we could pop this out of the ground, cut it into about 3 pieces, and spread it out in the garden. And that would be true with most perennials. This would be, as they're going dormant in the fall, is a great time to pop them out of the ground for several reasons. One, it's cooler, it's less stress on the plant, but also I can still see where it is. If I let it go completely dormant, I won't know where it actually is in the garden until it comes back up in the spring. So back over to the vegetable garden to talk about a couple other things. If you're not putting in cool season vegetables, get the ground covered in your garden. So once you pull out those summer vegetables, you can cover them with leaves. You can cover them with the ground with hardwood mulch. You can cover it with compost. Doesn't really matter. Get the ground covered so that weeds don't take it over. It keeps all the microbes alive. It insulates the ground. And this is true with your garden beds throughout your entire landscape. Keeping fresh mulch or keeping the ground covered. I don't care whether it's compost, mulch, leaves, whatever it is. Leaves make great mulch. Keeping the ground covered is one of the keys. It may be the main key to gardening, honestly, because it controls soil temperature. So when the temperature's hot, it keeps it cooler. When its temperature's cold, it keeps it warmer. It keeps down weeds. It regulates water. So it can't be any more important, okay? I mean, it's the number one thing, honestly, and probably in garden. Keep the ground covered with organic material. Second reason to be back over here at the vegetable garden, this is the only thing that I would fertilize. Well, 2 things I will fertilize. I'll fertilize my cool season vegetables with an organic fertilizer, and then as my cool season flowers go in later in October, that's going to be the pansies and snapdragons that I talked about earlier in the video, or flowering cabbage or kale or whatever. Those things will get some fertilizer because they're actively growing, okay? Everything else in this landscape, I definitely want to wait until late winter, early spring to be fertilizing them. I don't want to fertilize them when they're not actively growing. It can cause some things to continue to try to push out growth that would end up getting damaged. A couple other points on mulch. If you have diseased plants, I talked about not throwing your diseased vegetable plants into your compost pile. It's the same thing. If you have like a big leaf hydrangea and it's got leaf spots on it, I would dispose of those leaves and then mulch with something else. Second point is, don't discount any of the clean leaves that are falling off of your plants. If you've got deciduous plants that are going to sleep, if you've got your perennials that are going dormant, you've got the leaves falling off your shade trees, all of that stuff makes great mulch. You don't have to go out and spend a fortune on mulch. And in fact, if you can grind your leaves up and use them as a base, you can do that and then put a super thin layer of some sort of type of mulch that is more attractive, to you in your garden, and that will save you some money. If you have to get 10 yards of mulch to mulch your yard, you might be able to do half of it in this other material that you create on your own, and then bring in 5 yards and put down just a thin veneer on top of it to make it more attractive. October here in the southeast United States can actually be very dry. We can get tropical storms and hurricanes and that kind of thing that can just flood us out, but for the most part it tends to be a dry time of year. So as I'm planting these new things in the vegetable garden and the pansies and the snapdragons, I probably, I'm going to have to do some watering on them. Some of these existing things that I'm trying to carry further into fall, like this salvia, I got to be thinking about doing a little bit of watering on it. Definitely the shrubs and trees and things that you're planting, got to be watchful for them. Go and dig down around the base of them, see if they need water. If they do, water them well. By November into December, typically that slows down and we don't have to do, especially here in the southeast, any watering over the winter time. But October, you do need to be thinking about it. Also keep in mind, water is an insulator. And so if we're going to have a close call with a frost, with an early frost in October, which is always possible, and you're trying to keep some of these things alive, you can water them well and then put a light covering over them to protect them. And you'll probably get them through a few light frost early on. And sometimes that works great for extending the garden here in the south for a long time. Sometimes we'll just get a couple early threats of frost and then we can go almost to December before we actually get a real freeze. Big decisions have to be made in October about your tropical bulbs. I'm in zone 7 and I'm in an area where caladiums either need to be dug or I can just leave them in the ground and have them be annuals, or I can dig them up and save them through the winter. Back here behind me is an elephant ear, same exact thing. I can dig it out and store it for the winter. These can actually be container planted, and if I had a bright enough space inside, I could just grow them as house plants during the winter time. That's an option. Or the bulbs can be stored. Dahlias fall into that category. Calla lilies fall into that category. And so you can look up other videos on how to store dahlia tubers if you want to. If you're in zone 8, and above, typically dahlias are perennial for you and will come back. I'm in the area right in the middle and I've got so many dahlias, and so some of them back there I'm going to store that I really, really like. Some of them I'm just going to take my chances, roll the dice. Some will come back and some won't, but it is time to make the decision on these tropicals, whether or not you're going to try to save them till next year or just let them go as annuals and rebuy them in the spring. So what else for October? This is probably your last chance to really take notes from the spring and summer successes and failures. Write down the annuals that really performed well, the perennials that really performed well, things that you thought of during the season that you might want to move around later. It's time to be planning for next year, go ahead and purchase your spring seeds sooner than later. There's so many new gardeners that a lot of these things are kind of hard to get right now. And going to local gardens and looking around, coming up with some inspiration for next year. Again, shopping during the off seasons, so you can see that in your area you might be able to buy things. Even if you're in a colder area in the country where you can't have flowers in the winter, maybe you can have stem color and foliage color, and you can have interesting things in the garden. You can have beautiful conifers that we can't grow here in the south, and those things really show up. Really pop in the wintertime, in public gardens. The other thing is hardscaping. I've got fence projects and house projects I'd like to get on. Of course, a lot of that is determined by, you know, lumber prices here going forward. I'd really like for those to come down, but that's my plan for the winter typically, is to get these hardscaping things accomplished. So thank you guys for following along with these videos. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back in November with another one. Thanks for watching.